Okay, so I want to talk about this Lucifer idea. So Lucifer is the morning star, and he's the angel of the untrammeled intellect. That's how he's portrayed in Milton, right? And he's allied in some strange way with the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
If I might
Yes.
just interject, if he's the morning star, what do you do in the morning after the morning star rises? You wake up.
Right.
Woke.
Right. The spirit of enlightenment. Right. Okay, so
or dark enlightenment, as it were.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, that's the question. What's the difference between genuine? What's the difference between what's genuine and what's false? Let's say.
Yes.
Folks, that really is the question. What's the difference between genuine and false? I'm Matt Leck. Welcome. This is episode 219 of Left Reckoning. Once again, David out on a sabbatical for a book you all are going to be buying a second later this year. That is Jordan Peterson and conceptual James Lindsay. And it's talking about my boy John Milton. And there's this thing before we get to actually, let me just talk Alex Skopic, one of my favorite writers in magazines. You can see a lot of his work in Current Affairs, also published elsewhere. Talking about, I wanted to talk to him for a long time. Actually, since last fall, he released an article that we talk about called Nazis on Aisle 9, which goes into corporate collaboration with the Nazis, and how it goes much broader than just like IBM and Volkswagen. The stories we kind of pass along as the idea that we have a handle on how wide it was, and it's a really great piece. He also has done two more recent pieces on how different countries are dealing with billionaires, whether it is our country where we put a landlord in charge of the country twice, and a credit shark in between that, and Biden and Trump, and also China, how China has actually created this new thing called the ex-billionaire, which is a beautiful sounding word. But back to that whole thing they're talking about where, Jordan Peterson's mentioning my boy, John Milton, and James Lindsay butts in to say, what happens in the morning? You wake up. That reminds me of one of my favorite jokes here. This is the comedian Chris James on his old prank show 3 years ago, making some connections to some conspiracy theorists on YouTube, the way that James did, drawing the connection of, what you do in the morning, you wake up. Here's just a little bit of that before we get to some breaking down John Milton's history.
Was it Bush impregnated his own daughters and then they got rid of what was that? I wasn't sure exactly what you were saying there, but I agree with.
Yeah, well, because they had the sacrifice.
Let me go a little bit ahead here. Oh, sorry.
Right.
Hold on. Let me find. I thought he did the 4. Yeah, here it is. Okay, sorry. It's the 42069 connection. This is the real meat of this clip here.
A lot of them. You had a lot of the math equations on there, and that's good, man. I'm all about those math equations. 420, Hitler's birthday. Obviously, they use it as a marijuana thing, but what you have to keep in mind is 4 plus 2 is 6. And then 6 upside down is 9, and that's 69. So 420 and 69 are very much connected.
Oh yeah, and plus 420 was the first day that they ran that. It was day 1 of the Los Alamos flu simulation in 2009. That Dr. Alexander Jones.
2009. 2 plus 9 is 11. 11 is 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 times 4 is 6. 6 upside down is 9. 4 minus 2 divided by 2 is 420. 420 69. Right?
I don't know what
Yeah.
to say. I mean,
Mathematically.
Okay, so I think you get this. Yeah, classic. Not even. But let's talk about John Milton. So, and what the genuine from the real. Before we get into Jordan Peterson's theory of the what is it, the right wing woke. So John Milton was not just a poet. Folks might know him, was literally a revolutionary. Or revolutionary. That's not even an adjective. That is a noun. He was a revolutionary during the English Civil War back in the 1640s, which is when King Charles I got his head cut off. The Republic briefly established under Oliver Cromwell. And Milton wasn't just a minor figure in that. He was literally basically the foreign secretary. They called him the Secretary of Foreign Tongues. And he was close to being killed when the monarchy was restored in 1660 for, among other things, saying, hey, you know how we're thinking about killing King Charles? Well, I'm going to publish a pamphlet about how actually it's our right, and God would want us to be able to chop the heads off of kings down here. A very, very, very radical guy for his time, Puritans, right? And also, and so when you talk about Paradise Lost, as Jordan Peterson mentions there, and how they talk about Satan as sort of like, well, here's a little bit more.
So then it becomes a meta principle, and it looks to me like it's something like the drive to power. And that fits well with the notion that, well, Marx would be on top of the communists and Hitler would be on top of the Nazis.
I don't think Marx was entirely on top. I don't know if he means Stalin there.
And Mussolini would be top of the Italian fascists.
Yeah.
So if the belief system is pressed into the service of the hierarchical status of its originators, then there tends to be something profoundly Luciferian behind it. Yes?
Yes. So now.
Yeah, so we'll go further on that in a second. But so the interpretation of Satan in Paradise Lost, which is a great poem. Everyone should read that poem. Some folks, William Empson, the literary critic, makes the case that Satan is the protagonist, the person we're meant to be rooting for in Paradise Lost. And it's true that in that poem, the best sections of it are to deal with Satan. The most badass descriptions of an epic. It's literally an epic poem. The most epic stuff is to do with Satan. Now, conservatives have always taught that poem as it's bad to do revolutions. Now, of course, with that history of John Milton that I gave you, that's obviously not where he's coming from with the portrayal of Satan and the revolt against God portrayed in the early parts of the poem. It's actually kind of something that Jordan Peterson talks about all the time, which is individualism. And he even mentions that, like, and pride and that sort of stuff, right? Now, this part where he says what the satanic thing, though, is making sure it goes through the main top guy is kind of awkward to square with what he's actually talking about here with this whole woke right thing, which is basically Joe Rogan is inviting on people who are critics of Israel, some of whom I would say, not Dave Smith. I don't think Dave Smith's. I think Dave Smith might even be Jewish. I don't think he's anti-Semitic at all. But I think the other guy, Joe Rogan has some anti-Semites on that show. I mean, Candace Owens, I believe, has been on that program. But mainly critics of Israel. I've always observed, even going back to TMBS years, that the whole intellectual dark web, as profiled by who else but Barry Weiss, now of the Free Press, we're so-called intellectually diverse, supposedly, except one through line of them until the late edition of, what's the blog guy's name, Andrew Tate? They were all vehemently pro-Israel. It's the problem Jordan Peterson has is that it's not just him and Brett Weinstein and James Lindsay. Like, Joe Rogan can't just book the same four people over. It seems like that seems like what he's doing, but he can't just book the same four people over again. And as Israel is doing a genocide that is apparent to anybody who doesn't have their eyes closed to it for one reason or another, it's difficult to program around that. And so Douglas Murray got whacked in a debate with Dave Smith. And now they're having to deal with, okay, we have to figure out how do we make our circle a little bit more controllable now we're in power. And of course, Jordan Peterson reeling a little bit from part of his sort of fascist international across the northern border with Canada, leading to a massive electoral loss for the Canadians in the most recent elections, to the point where Pierre Poilievre lost his riding, I think. Is that right? Anyway, let's just play a little bit more of this, and then we'll get to the Rogan Dark Woke clip that
of the hierarchical status of its originators, then there tends to be something.
Yeah.
Let's get that again. I don't quite follow how he gets this from Satan to Marx, Mussolini and Hitler, but anyway. Let's let the doctor talk.
Belief system is pressed into the service of the hierarchical status of its originators, then there tends to be something profoundly Luciferian behind it. Yes?
Yes. So now we're talking at a very abstract, deep, whether metaphysical is, I think metaphysical is the right word, level for what represents woke. This isn't going to be recognizable to your average Joe on the street who's dealing with, a pride parade and saying, well, that's woke. I understand woke. But
and they are called pride parades.
They are called pride.
And so they were just about to say, okay, how do we distinguish this? Because it's so obvious. I guess what the woke left is. It's pride parades. And then they get distracted by the bit they've been doing for half a decade now, which is like, isn't it bad they call it pride parades? Pride's a sin, you silly bastards. Meanwhile, any time these guys talk about how accurate assessment of, say, Western history is, whether it's Canada with residential schools and treatments of Native Americans, or America, different ways, including similar, for doing genocides here. Whenever it's that sort of stuff, it's, well, why can't we be proud of our country? Why are you making us ashamed? But whenever it's gay people saying, hey, let's just have fun and be ourselves, that's Satan, actually. Hey, let's take a little bit more here. And I just, man, this whole thing where James Lindsay cuts in and say, we're actually having a very deep conversation here. This is fart sniffing 101. And look, if you subscribe to this, welcome. Because you've been subscribing to a simulation of intellectual thought. And I think that's a real problem with Peterson and these guys. Like, this whole thing, how about a little bit of historicizing of John Milton, if we're going to go there, instead of this faffing about, I don't want to say, instead of this, masturbating about what Lucifer means, and in a way, like, it's meant to trick Christians into thinking they're getting a sort of academic treatment of a subject, but it's still just church shit.
That's woke. I understand woke, but
and they are called pride parades.
They are called pride parades.
And the cardinal sin of Lucifer is pride. Right.
It does fit together.
Desire to replace God, to replace the fundamental moral order. So I figured something else out too recently. So
Also, one interesting thing about Milton and writing Paradise Lost is that was after he escaped with his life and wasn't going to be put to death over saying that we should put kings to death when the kings came back. A lot of his poems are him sort of meditating on that failure of that revolution. How could God, and this is probably a lesson for maybe some of us on the left these days, how could God go against something that is very clearly just? Milton thinking parliamentarism over the monarchy, thinking the monarchy basically um, became satanic. Uh, you know, we ever talk about that?
Also,
that? Let's just finish up this clip. Then we'll
recently,
get to the Joe Rogan.
so imagine that you could found a society on power.
Oh yeah, then they just go to some dumbass thought experiment. I mean, are people getting it that there's not actually a whole lot of substance here? That this is a little bit of empty calories when it comes to that? Maybe not. Let's play this Joe Rogan thing. This is the thing that has sort of caused this tiff on the right. Although I think Lindsay maybe did a tweet.
I can really see that.
Oh yeah. You're right, Autumn Leaves. Thank you for. This is why we haven't heard so much about Lindsay, because he has all those weird pictures with these cult members that are, interesting. I wonder if there's anything Luciferian happening around that way. But this is Jordan Peterson. This is like Joe Rogan here.
I can really see this starting to happen on the right. Like, I've been tracking psychopathic behavior on the right for probably 4 years, something like that. Especially on the anti-Semitic side, because that's really where it reared its head first. And
why is that?
There's nothing more annoying than a successful minority. Right. Now that.
So already, that question from Joe Rogan, why is that? Why is that it comes from the right? Or why are people anti-Semitic? Or why is anti-Semitism rising? A lot of interesting sort of answers to those questions. I would say part of it is platforming of anti-Semites. And I would say even a bigger part of that, or a very related issue, that is conflating actual anti-Semites, actual people who have bigotry and hatred and conspiratorial thoughts about Jews as a people, with criticism of Israel. Well, I'll let it play a little bit more. I don't think I'm being too uncharitable to Rogan.
Right.
Here.
Now, that's part of it. And I'm going to, I might as well get myself in trouble.
I don't think it's just because of all the success that Jews have. I think that, I don't know, Jews have been fairly prominent in culture for a while. I think to the extent that we're seeing a rise in hate, I wouldn't rank these this way, just to name a few things. It is the type of people who run our social media sites. Elon Musk threw up Hitler salutes, and Joe Rogan said he didn't know what that was. I don't know. That sort of thing. I would also say the elephant in the room that Jordan Peterson doesn't want to talk about is the actions of Israel currently, and how they are saying it is in the name of all Jews, but actually there's going to be more time to.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
this is a third real subject.
Well, so it's a real terrible.
And this is a problem, the way even Rogan's talking about it and messaging it here, like, oh, it's so dangerous. It's not actually that dangerous. You just got to know what the fuck you're talking about. It's not dangerous. You're just stupid.
I might as well get myself in trouble right away too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
this is a third real subject.
Well, so it's a real terrible subject.
It's interesting because if you don't criticize it enough, you're compromised. If you criticize, it's like when it comes to anti-Semitism, like it's one of those things where you can't separate. It's a religion, and it's also a race, and it's also
No. It's not a race. Race is not a real thing. It's not a scientific notion. Race is a political construction. First off, it's also Israel is the government. we're talking about here. It is a nation. It is a nation state that gets a lot of subsidy from our government. It is not Jews at all. And this is why this is the whole thing about this not being a dangerous subject unless you're just a
Race,
massively stupid
and
moron.
it's also a government.
Mhm.
That's where things get weird.
Right.
And then there's also the concept of intelligence agencies and compromise that also gets attached to it, the manipulation.
Mossad, of course, very a nefarious organization. They're partnered with ours, and all these sorts of organizations are covert spy agencies are bad. That's fairly obvious. Has no bearing on
Of
Jews,
world markets and money, and there's a lot to unpack. And then there's regular Jewish people have nothing to do with that.
Well, the Jews too they're very successful.
Yeah.
And so what you would expect from a purely statistical point of view is you'd expect them to be overrepresented at the extremes.
They're also a walled garden, right?
Meaning?
Meaning it's very difficult to join. They don't proselytize. They don't try to get you to join.
Right.
And they're all very tightly knit. They call themselves the clan. They're all like locked in. The Jewish clan, not KKK. The problem with that term has been compromised by the Ku Klux Klan. But I mean it as terms of tribe.
Well, community.
Yeah, community. They're very tight knit in that regard. They stick together.
Well,
and if you understand the history, obviously, of Nazi Germany and of persecution in Eastern Europe, you have to. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, all these complex things are multidimensional. I mean, I watched your whole conversation with Douglas, and I thought.
Just to talk about that thing about how you'd expect the reference to poverty and G's doing very well. I mean, cursory search here. Around 15% of American Jews live in poverty. Perhaps that's not right. Doesn't that compare to 7% of white people, 17% of black people? I don't think it's the Judaism.
A very
guys.
credible job. All three of them.
Now, actually, there's another elephant in the room here. It's not just Israel that I shouldn't overlook. Where does this come from? Where is this anti-Semitism coming from? Where is it coming from? Maybe it's the book you keep fucking talking about and the way that Christians have related to it. It's the Christianity. It's the same place it came from that did the Holocaust. That's where it's coming from.
Navigating unbelievably choppy waters. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, because
So instead of just saying, Christianity in the West that I love so much has a huge anti-Semitism problem that is in fact projected into the Middle East for them to deal with. Instead of going into that, it's their pockets pretty full.
Things I was trying to figure out when I was watching that is, do I think I could have done a better job of any of you and I?
He's talking about the
certainly didn't
Dave
walk
Smith,
away from
Douglas
it with
Murray
that
debate.
idea in mind. But then underneath all that, I thought there's a really unbelievably tricky problem here, and I think that's why it's made it poked up into. Well, you also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation. And the issue is, how do you identify the
Now, this is a master supplicant at work in Jordy Peterson. He can't insult Joe Rogan to his face and say, why did you let that happen? So we get this thing about it poked up. Look, you facilitated it, but this little thing poked up, even though everyone did a great job, Joe, including yourself. You need a foot massage. You did a great job hosting that debate, but some anti-Semitism poked up. And by anti-Semitism, I mean
pretenders. And it's even worse now. And then make a barrier, right? Well, you also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation. And the issue is, how do you identify the psychopathic pretenders? And it's even worse now. And then make a barrier, right? Now, the right was calling for...
One way I would say is in the case of Douglas Murray, the guy who previously scoffed at the notion of standpoint epistemology of the, oh, you have to be in my shoes or you don't know how to speak on this plight. The guy who scoffed at that for his entire career until confronted with an anti-Zionist that could, put string words together, immediately said, well, if you haven't been there, you have nothing to say about it. That might be the psychopathic guy, but they don't want to say that because
they're
on Douglas Murray's side.
And they didn't, and they couldn't. And the left is not good at drawing barriers, partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what I was, because I've been watching these right-wing, they're not right-wing, these psychopathic types manipulate the edge of the conservative movement for their own gain.
Right.
And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guys. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well, particularly now.
Yes, particularly now.
Right.
And
excuse me, Joe? What does that mean? Particularly now. What does free speech warrior Joe Rogan mean to imply about the left at this moment in history? It's anti-Semitic? What's an example of that? Where? Where is that? The GOP, where's that tweet at? Jim Jordan, House Judiciary, tweeted out this last year. Maybe it wasn't last year, sometime in the past. Kanye, Elon, Trump, House Judiciary, GOP. That tweet's been deleted. What's Kanye up to? Do you have any new songs? Huh?
this is like, I can really mentally on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right,
Well,
but
that's amazing because Jordan Peterson is literally putting the anti-Semitism issue better. I mean, he's still smearing the tar on the left with the brush, but look, let's be ultra generous and say that occasionally some folks might get the wrong idea from a frankly anti-Semitic culture at a heightened time and say, well, this is the Jews doing it. It'd be horrible. I think the left is fairly vigilant about that stuff, just my experience. Certainly don't tolerate that here at all. But then Joe Rogan has to say, particularly now. That is the lie of our times, folks. That's the big lie right now, that the people that are opposing what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, which is first, over the course of decades, provoke attacks that they can use as pretexts for genocide and ethnic cleansing. That's what's happening. This whole thing, they got a new plan. No, it was always a plan. Oh, but they retreated. They retreated because the politics weren't right for the moment.
Particularly now.
Yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so gain.
Right.
And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guys. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well, but particularly now.
Yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so, you've let your curiosity
indubitably. Let's not get into that. Let's just
guide you. Your curiosity and your desire for knowledge, this quest, you've let that guide you as a podcaster. And by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly the same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for? Do you?
The original guardrails of the IDW were, we support Israel. Joe may be the least Zionist originally, but listen to him conduct this interview and talk about the anti-Semitism of the left. And so, yeah, okay, he'll have Dave Smith on. And after a while passes and comedians start making fun of Douglas Murray because he's ludicrous, he sort of agrees, yeah, look, it's stupid what Douglas Murray said. I fundamentally agree with him about the left anti-Semites, though. And that's Joe Rogan, the least Zionist of those people, of any of the people in Barry Weiss's intellectual dark web profile for
a conceptual system worked out for that. Like, because
what do you mean? In what way?
Well,
how do I look for in terms of people to talk to?
Yeah. Because you have this insanely immense platform, and you're inviting people onto it. And you said to Douglas, and I know this to be true, that you're not really thinking about the outcome exactly. You're thinking about, this is an interesting person to talk to, and I'd like to go on that quest. But then,
that's not what Joe Rogan thinks. It's not just, oh, this is an interesting person. Do you think you'd have your stupid ass on time after time after time? Joe Rogan wants people that will be pro Joe Rogan on his program. And so Patrick Bet David comes on, so I've got some gifts for you. We all love you. Jordan Peterson, has to step up for his buddy Douglas Murray, but doesn't want to go at Joe Rogan because, look, you can't go at Joe.
You have the additional conundrum. We're trying to work this out in the Daily Wire side of things, too. Not to say that that's exactly the same situation.
No, that wasn't Douglas Murray of the bell curve.
It's like
that you're thinking of
once
Charles
you
Murray.
gain in reach and authority, then how do you know that? How do you take great care that the people you're talking to aren't, what would you say, eliciting or feeding a subculture? Yeah, that's right. That hasn't got the proper aims. Like, I guess the legacy media probably worked that out by having people, mediators, right, and guests, and that was also back when we could rely on the structures of authority in some sense to filter. And now we're in this helter-skelter world where everything is
the
up
legacy
for
media
grabs.
is the worst at that now.
Yeah, I know.
They're the worst.
I know,
which is fascinating. It really is.
Joe, the whole point was, are you good at it, though? Keep bringing on, like, former, wink, wink, CIA agents, talk about the deep state. Bring on guys, talk about China should be for China. Ireland should be for the Irish. The conversation you're having right now, I'm sure that guy is not a psychopath. The guy who's been like, I'm trying to imagine what the due diligence would be that Rogan is supposed to do that wouldn't flag Jordan Peterson. Hey, Jordan, this Royal Society of Psychologists in Montreal or whatever, or Toronto, why do they say you aren't allowed to call yourself a doctor anymore? That might be the type of thing that would turn up if Joe started kicking the tires on some of these guests.
Fascinating way. You lose faith in a New York Times piece.
We are beyond that, Joe. It is not 2016 anymore, buddy. Yeah, we get it. Legacy media is dead. What we're losing faith now is independent media. Oh, I'm so independent. I'm so much better than MSNBC or Fox News. Anyway, welcome Mark Zuckerberg to talk about bow hunting and how great he loves shooting animals, apparently, and how cool of a guy he is, and how wild out of control the CFPB is. Oh, here's Mark Andreessen's egghead coming to say the exact opposite of what the CFPB is doing with regards to banking. Oh, Elon Musk, yeah, he didn't do a Hitler salute. I think that they're so ready to just throw anything on this guy. He's just trying to protect free speech and make the government more official. Anyway, yeah, it's crazy when you lose faith in CNN.
You go, like, well,
This is a man in real time talking to a guy who has a psychiatry background, being propelled toward some self-reflection by that psychiatrist, and immediately talking about actually it's everybody else that has this problem.
You know, it's like you go like, well, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I know this. I know what they're doing. I know they're just, this is editorial bullshit. And that didn't used to be the case, I don't think.
No, it didn't.
But then I go back to like what I learned about the Woodward, Bernstein, Nixon thing at Watergate. That was all essentially an intelligence operation. Have you ever looked into that? You know, I had Bill Murray on the podcast, and Bill Murray said one of the wildest things. He read the first 5 pages of Bob Woodward's biography on John Belushi, Wired.
Mm-hmm.
He read the first 5 pages. He's like,
well, all that stuff. There is spooky stuff to deal with with Watergate, and Bernstein, Woodward and Bernstein absolutely have issues there. We Midnight Null Night. We should. I do want to cover India and Pakistan. Yeah, that's a guest up. But yeah, Joe there, going into you know, the original wiretapping was trying to get information on what was told to the public at the time was people setting up dates, and well, if a date comes with a receipt, is it a date? So that's the kind of thing that they were looking into. It was a bunch of Howard Hunt type of folks from the CIA that some of whom may have had connections to Kennedy. But anyway, I'm not going to go into conspiracy stuff impromptu. That's a bit too indulgent for for my solo night. Hey, Gene, good to see you. Folks, that is my little spiel on the woke right. I will say this conversation will be a lot less mysterious and mystified if they just say what they mean about Israel and anti-Semitism. But the fact that they can't, Jordan Peterson can't just say, well, you should have just subscribed to the Douglas Murray take. And not doing so is a big problem. That kind of gives the game away. So I don't think that they're going to get a handle on drawing these barriers. And I look forward to this whole flying too close to the sun thing, biting them in the ass. Patreon.com/left reckoning. Hey, if you we're downshifting a little bit, of course, because it is May and David is finishing up his book. Now would be a great time to support us on Patreon, just to give us a little boost, because we're not getting quite out there as much. But so patreon.com/left reckoning. Thomas Kennedy was back on the program this Sunday for the Sunday show. We talked about the Ron DeSantis's wife scam issue and Thomas's perspective on the immigration issue under the Trump this time around. I just really value his perspective. Patreon.com/left reckoning. I'll have some fun stuff for you this weekend as well. Here is Alex Skopic from earlier today. Welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. Without David, who is finishing his book, which you all are going to pre-record as soon as we give you the details on how to do that. But I'm joined now by Alex Skopic. He is an associate editor at Current Affairs and, frankly, one of my favorite magazine writers. We're going to talk about 3 of his pieces here today, and I'll have all of those linked in the description here. But Alex, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So there's 3, and you're fairly prolific over at Current Affairs. People can check out your writing, but there's 3 pieces that kind of seem thematically linked to me that have been sort of treating something that I'm fascinated with, which is the oligarchy problem. And I think I'm not the only one that's thinking about that, and different models of how to approach it and conceptualize it. So first, let's talk about home here. Donald Trump, back in office, Trump 47, there's all sorts of ways to describe him. It's like the parable of the guy who's describing an elephant. You can describe him as a white nationalist, a TV star, but you zero in on landlord. Why is that?
Yeah. The article is just called "Trump is What Happens When You Give a Landlord Power." And the main reason that I wanted to focus on that is because it's not a criticism I've seen made of him. Like you say, there are all kinds of ways to criticize Donald Trump. There are dozens upon dozens of anti-Trump books, but they tend not to focus on his landlordness. And I think that's because, for a lot of the liberal press, they don't really object to landlords as a economic class. So I wanted to zero in on that. And I think once you think of him as sort of landlord in chief, it explains a lot about his policy.
Yeah, I've been, and we've covered here on this program the examination of his Trump Tower construction by Wayne Barrett, journalist, deceased, but goes into he exploited undocumented labor in the sort of theoretically obvious way capitalists will, with undocumented Polish workers. And then when they started putting up a stink about getting stiffed for pay, he threatened them with deportation services. So this is like it goes, like you say, like to the core of his being and his political project, this sort of identity. What policies has he pursued for landlords specifically?
So the main one right now, in his first term, he gave a massive tax break for landlords. Along with the raft of tax breaks he gave to wealthy people of all kinds. But he had one particular tax break which allowed landlords to deduct quite a bit of their rental income, I think 20% or more, from their taxes, just completely tax-free. At the same time as he was slashing programs that benefit people who need homes. He in his second term now, the tax breaks are still in place, and he as part of the Doge thing, he's slashed housing and urban development. He has half of the staff of that agency, I think, is gone at this point. He has cut a specific program from HUD that gave about $1 billion to maintain buildings for use as affordable housing. And he has defunded the agencies that enforce the Fair Housing Act. And then that particularly, when I read that one, that was astonishing because, Trump is a third generation landlord at this point. His father, Fred, was a landlord and a kind of notoriously racist one, had issues with the Fair Housing Act as a piece of law. And now Donald is just defunding it completely. So it goes right the way back.
And it's not really limited there. Like this sort of, you can see in maybe foreign policy, some of this landlord ideology coming through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. With the huge one is the Gaza Riviera he wants to build. He talks about Gaza as a piece of property, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the same thing. He talks about the valuable beachfront development they could do there. And there's sort of two sides to this, I think. He has the landlord's instinct to acquire property. He wants, more and more land, just like he wanted more and more buildings back in New York. So he wants Gaza, he wants Greenland, he wants Panama is another one. And then he thinks in terms of, how a landlord thinks of their building. They can very tightly control who comes in and out. So they can make you fill out a permission form to have a guest if you have a really strict landlord. And that's what Trump's doing with this eviction business or this deportation. Deportation is just eviction, in terms of nation.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, at this time where we see people doing tenant organizing, a lot of concern over the price of rent, which I thought, I share your frustration with the ineptness or, I guess, collaboration of the Democratic Party on these issues, because the ability for Trump to sort of, like, when he was president the first time, he wasn't making the sort of rise of rental costs better. And that's just not a critique that Democrats can make. Instead, we're calling him a king. We're like really depoliticizing it.
Or even worse, I remember at the DNC had what's his name, J.B. Pritzker, come out, and his criticism of Trump was that he's not a real billionaire like me.
Right. Yeah, and like, man, that I'll say, like, he has pretty big buildings with his name on it. Like, if that's not being a billionaire, like, you can say, look, it's fine, it's backed by banks, it's done with sweetheart deals with the city or whatever. But is that really different than a lot of capitalists, or is he just like showier about it?
No, he's just this is the thing. Like, the sort of democratic instinct is to claim Trump as, some unique monster, where really no, he's just the perfect example of his class. And if it weren't him, the same economic agenda, the same desire to funnel money up to the top, would have just found some other businessman as the vessel.
Exactly. And so this kind of brings us to well, at least one contrary example. I don't want to say it's the main one, but it's a pretty prominent one in China. And people may be surprised. I mean, sometimes every once in a while, critics of China will say, like, they have billionaires as well, too. And we'll get to sort of the sort of arc that they've been traveling. But first, you have the case study of Jack Ma in this article. If I haven't read the title, China Knows How to Deal with Its Billionaires. Who was Jack Ma, and why did Xi have to teach him some discipline, and how did he do that?
Yes. So Jack Ma, the best way because it's not an exact one-to-one with the American situation, but the way I'd always describe him is that he's the closest thing China has ever had to, like, an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. He's very similar to Bezos in particular, because he started a few years after Bezos starts Amazon in the early 90s. Jack Ma starts Alibaba, which is basically the Chinese Amazon. He sells things very cheaply. He comes to dominate the market. He drives out a lot of brick and mortar business. Same model.
And what did he do to upset sort of the Chinese government?
Well, it's similar to Bezos again, because in America, of course, now we have Bezos really putting his thumb on the scale with elections, right? Like, he had that thing where he refused to let the Washington Post endorse anyone in the last presidential election, which of course benefited Trump. He has issued this edict that the Washington Post will, the opinion pages will always defend free markets, never criticize them. And it's really ironic, especially because I don't know if you remember this, but back in the 2020 election cycle, poor Bernie got blasted for claiming that Bezos influenced the content of the Washington Post. Like, he got so much flack for that, and now it's just obvious. The crime of the left is always being right about 5 years too early. But Jack Ma is that kind of guy, and he, in a similar way to what Bezos is doing, he tried to wade into Chinese politics and throw his weight around. He did this speech at an investors summit where he really criticized the regulatory regime they have over there, and he criticized these international set of regulations that are designed to prevent financial crashes, like the 2008 one. He said, oh no, we need to get rid of all these regulations. He called it the pawn shop mentality of being too cautious about finance. And he tried to just make this sort of sea change in how China deals with its economics.
Yeah, and you say, you get into some of the monopoly fines, and I guess, is antitrust sort of the way that they went after him, or is there anything else worth emphasizing?
There's a few things. He The way this story has been told in the English-speaking press, they make it sound as if, Jack Ma, he voiced some opinions, and the terrible dictatorship of China, just came down on his head and punished him. But that's not really the full story, because he was trying to get rid of just very fundamental regulations in international finance, and he was personally invested in all these so-called innovative forms of finance. He had an app as part of his Alibaba family of products that was basically for payday loans. He controlled something like a third of all the peer-to-peer lending in China. In the article that I found, they get into, how in this city of Hangzhou, where he's from, it just devastated people. There were like suicides because people couldn't pay their debt back. And this is the guy that the Western press, wants to make their innocent martyr from the evil China. But he made this speech, and it was finally like too much. And they did antitrust to the Alibaba company, split it up into several different CEO, imposed like historically huge fines.
You have a beautiful word in this piece, ex-billionaire. And, I've been obsessed with the sort of expansion of Chinese high-speed rail over the past decades or so, and some of the other advancements they've made. This is a stat that I think puts those to shame. You say, let's see here. More importantly, he's been reminded that he and his money are not untouchable, and he's not the only one. According to Business Insider, China has 432 ex-billionaires whose wealth and power have waned since 2021, thanks to a combination of market downturns and Communist Party intervention. That's roughly a third of the billionaires the country had at its peak. That's amazing.
No, it's impressive, isn't it? And to be clear, these people, in most cases that I've seen, they're still very rich. They're still, 100 millionaires. But they've been reined into a more manageable level. They've been taught that there are some limits. You can't just do whatever you like whenever you like.
And that's not just something for China, right? That's something that we have at previous times understood when, we say, helped invent corporations 150 years ago, that these should have some sort of public mission. I finished a book by a guy named William Magnuson, For Profit, A History of Corporations. It goes directly into that. The idea that these things should be supported for their own sake is ridiculous. And just to go take it back to China, Xi Jinping met with the DeepSeek founder. DeepSeek is the, I believe, hedge fund in China that created the large language model that really upset a lot of our AI models here. And Xi had him in for a photo op, of course. This is about national prestige. And he says he took pains to emphasize the entrepreneur's importance to Chinese economic strength, referring to, quote, two unshakable principles, meaning that both the public and private sector should be supported. But he also reiterated ruling Chinese Communist Party's control over business, stressing that companies should be ambitious in serving the country. And look, you might have some critiques of nationalism in that sort of sentence there, but in terms of a publicly oriented mission, as opposed to, say, enriching the capitalists, that just seems a way better model to be approaching these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think my China stance is sort of perfectly calibrated to annoy everyone, because on the liberal free market side, they're horrified that there could be state intervention in business or state-owned business. And then on the sort of ultra-communist side, they're horrified that there is any business element in the Chinese system. They think that that's a betrayal. But really, China, as far as I can tell, what they've got going on is just a responsible social democracy. They've got business, but within limits, and you can't overstep them too much.
Yeah, and my suspicion with the way elites view China, and I'm curious your position on this. It seems like there's going to be one model from China that's going to be imposed. It's either the what sort of appeals to capitalists about China, which is lower labor costs and maybe rights even. And then what appeals to people like us about it is controlling the people that, frankly, our press speaks for. So when the oligarchy class is criticized by a nation and their liberty is encroached upon, that is what like sort of the Washington Post views as an assault on democracy, because they view it, the capitalists, as democracy. But I think that the challenge is to try to say, no, that we need a state role toward investments that make society better, that aren't just about profit, and not, saving us from a sort of not a free fall. Maybe that's too exaggerated to talk about American economy right now, but I mean, seemingly us realizing we're falling behind in certain respects.
Well, there's, I think free fall is actually not too far off, because one of the big contrasts is that China is building actual physical things that are useful, whereas we are increasingly diverting our economy into fictitious cryptocurrencies and AI and all this sort of ephemeral nonsense that's only useful to Wall Street. We're not building trains, we're not building nuclear reactors.
Right. And I would say we gave up on so-called free trade a long time ago. My entire life, we've been threatening China for pirating Microsoft Word with intellectual property. And it's like in a racist notion that if we forbid them a word processor, they're not going to be able to make one themselves eventually, like because Bill Gates is that much of a genius. And, I mean, that's the thing with this DeepSeek thing. You have these people that run these AI companies that are just hoovering up data that they don't really have rights to try to make their models better. And then when they all of a sudden get beaten across the world by a hedge fund that's doing it sort of in their off hours, they complain about intellectual property. It seems like we've been fighting a losing battle, and maybe fighting the wrong one this entire time.
No, for sure. And of course, the free trade has only ever applied selectively. There's no free trade for Cuba.
Right.
But no, with the AI thing, like the AI, it's meant to be the future of the U.S. economy, and it's just not that good. Like I don't know if you've played around with it, but I've tried using, ChatGPT, and I'll ask it for to find me a few quotes for something, and half of the quotes it finds are just completely fictitious. They don't exist.
Yep.
So,
yeah, that is a huge problem. I mean, I tell this example much, but there's a book called The Monks of Monk Hall from like 1855. It isn't available in the sort of like public domain places that the AI would scrape. And so when I asked it for chapter summaries, the first couple chapters are available for it online, and it gave me good chapters on that. And then it basically made up the chapters it didn't have. And
no, I'm very skeptical on the AI. Like I've been telling people, you may want to get your hands on like physical books, because so much of the internet is going to be this sort of hallucinated junk.
That's my also paranoid theory is they realize too much of the signal is getting through to people. We need to add some noise to this and see if we can market that. The final place I want to turn our attention to is this piece I mentioned earlier, Nazis on Aisle 9. And, you don't have to go into too much of it. I do want people to go and read it. But I'm curious, this came out before the election. I believe you must have been working on it over the fall. What motivated you at that point? And did any of the case studies, like we've heard about IBM and the punch card machines with the Holocaust, I'm curious if any of the examples surprised you.
All right, yeah. So the Nazi article, Nazis on Aisle 9. It's got kind of a funny origin, and I don't think I've told anyone this yet. But there's a mall here in New Orleans, the Canal Street Mall, and it's got a movie theater up at the top of it. And I go there sometimes, and as you go through, one of the shops that you see is a great big glittering Hugo Boss outlet. And the one day I happened to be there, they had this mannequin display, and like the cardboard guy was this, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, crew-cut. He just looked like the perfect Nazi. And it reminded, I have no idea why they did it, because I sort of in the back of my head knew, okay, Hugo Boss, they made clothes for the Nazis. And then I kind of think about it, and I was like, oh, hang on, there's also this factoid about that you find in trivia books about how like the Fanta soda was made by the Nazis. And I was just like, well, hang on, how how many of these are there? And there's a lot, as it turns out. There's actually like ones that I didn't even have space for in the article. But yeah, there's just so many major US companies, major international companies, brands we all know, that just were perfectly happy to do business with Hitler and with the Third Reich. And they never really were punished for it in any way. I mean, they're just still here.
Yeah, I honestly think like the memory of IBM sort of creates a false impression that we really held their feet to the fire and shamed these companies about this. And that's just not the case. And, you know, I read the piece, and then like a few weeks later, you see the billionaires like Bezos, Zuckerberg, the Google guy, I can't remember his name, Satya Nadella, lining up behind Trump. And it's like, this is expected. Like, the only reason this didn't happen in 2016 is because of, I think, the popular vote didn't give those guys cover to do it. But they were more than happy to throw their hats in with this as an opportunity.
No, absolutely.
Alex Skopic, was there anything you want to tease? You are on Twitter. Is that a new
That's a new development. Yeah, I've resisted it for a long time. I deleted Twitter in 2018 and was off it for years, and then I figured, okay, I've got articles, I've got projects, I need to promote things. I guess I'll reluctantly go on there. Yeah, it's just at Skopic, spelled like my name. I think anything to tease. Next article is on our friend George Santos, and so that's going to be coming soon.
Very nice. Well, we look forward to that. Alex from New Orleans, thank you so much for joining Left Reckoning today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I enjoyed that, folks. One nice thing about this job is sometimes you read something and you're like, hey, I could ask this person to talk to me about it, and I could use the excuse of making content out of it, and they would want to do that. So happy to talk with Alex there about those articles. No post game tonight. I'm looking if there's any questions, you can throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I will take leave of y'all shortly. Again, I'll have a Sunday show for you at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Do support the show. David Looney Tunes is finishing a book. He's in the 9th inning, putting the finishing touches on a book that's going. You actually, Djene, what's the radio station, Djene? If you're still here, he talked about it. With Gene Bajalan himself. Was it KMSU? And you can actually hear them talk about it. I'll actually link that in the show notes. So I'll put that in there after I get off here. But I think that is going to be it. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see y'all patrons on Sunday. See you then.